Every morning began the same way for her. She walked through the school gates with her head lowered, clutching her bag as though it were a shield against the world. The noise of chatter and laughter surrounded her, but she never felt part of it. Her steps quickened when she heard the familiar voices, the ones that turned joy into dread. They never failed to find her. One would mimic the way she spoke, another would laugh at her shoes, and the third would always shove her lightly, pretending it was a joke. She endured it quietly, holding back her tears until she could hide in the bathroom stalls. Nobody stepped in. Teachers pretended not to notice, students looked away, and even the kind ones chose silence, afraid of becoming the next target. Each cruel word dug deeper into her heart, and every shove made her feel smaller. She longed to tell someone, but a voice inside her kept whispering that nobody would care. Meanwhile, her father lived in a different world, one filled with the exhaustion of double shifts, bills stacked on the counter, and the constant weight of being both mom and dad. His mornings started with hurried breakfasts, where he placed toast and a glass of milk in front of her, urging her to eat before the bus came. He tied his tie quickly, always trying to smile through the tiredness in his eyes. "Be brave today," he would say, kissing her forehead, never realizing how those words barely held her together at school. She adored him, and because of that love, she kept her pain hidden. How could she tell the man who worked so hard, who sacrificed so much, that she was breaking apart inside? He dropped her off at the gates each morning, watching her walk toward the building with a small wave. To him, she looked like every other kid, backpack bouncing, hair catching the sunlight, shoes scuffing the pavement. He never suspected that once she turned the corner, her world became crueler than he could imagine. At night, after long hours at work, he'd ask her how her day went, and she'd force a smile, saying, "Fine, Dad." He believed her, because he wanted to. Because believing her meant he was doing okay as a father. But beneath that smile, she was unraveling. The days blurred into one another, each one bringing another round of torment. Sometimes they pulled her books from her hands and tossed them onto the floor, laughing as she scrambled to pick them up. Sometimes they whispered so close to her ear that she felt their hot breath, telling her she was worthless. She counted down the minutes in every class, waiting for the bell to ring so she could escape, only to face them again in the hallways. She walked home with her shoulders tight, tears burning her eyes, wondering why no one ever cared enough to stop it. Yet in her quiet prayers at night, lying in her small bed, she whispered for strength. She asked God, the universe, or anyone who would listen, for someone to stand by her. She didn't need the world, she just needed one person who would say, "Enough." Her father, sitting in the next room with paperwork scattered across the table, had no idea that he was already the answer to those prayers. All it would take was for him to see what she had been hiding all along. The afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the playground. She walked slower that day, hoping the bullies would lose interest if she didn't draw attention to herself. But they had been waiting. The same taunting voices rose up behind her, circling her like predators that had found easy prey. One yanked her backpack, making her stumble. Another snatched the book she was holding, tossing it between their hands as she begged quietly, "Please, give it back." Her words only fueled their laughter. When she reached to grab it, they shoved her down onto the dirt, her knees scraping hard against the ground. This time, something in her broke. She didn't cry, not like before. Instead, she sat there, trembling, wishing she could disappear. What none of them knew was that her father had left work early. It was a rare chance, his boss had cut the shift short, and he thought of surprising his daughter by walking her home. He imagined her smile when she saw him waiting, that spark of joy that reminded him why every long hour was worth it. As he approached the playground, he saw a small crowd gathered. Children whispered, some giggled nervously, but most simply stood by, watching. He frowned, curious, until his eyes caught a glimpse of his little girl on the ground. Her hair was tangled, her palms scraped, her bag tossed carelessly nearby. Around her, 3 kids laughed and mocked, towering over her fragile frame. The sight froze him for a second, a storm of disbelief and rage swelling inside. Every ounce of exhaustion he had carried seemed to vanish, replaced with a fire that burned hotter than anything he had felt before. He had worked 2 jobs to make sure she never went without. He had sacrificed sleep, comfort, and his own dreams for her. And yet here she was, his entire world, being treated like nothing. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, and his footsteps grew heavier as he moved forward. The leader of the bullies sneered, about to push her again, when a shadow fell over them. The father's voice cut through the laughter like thunder. "Touch her again," he said, his tone low but unshakable, "and you're done." The words weren't loud, yet they carried a weight that silenced the entire playground. The bullies froze, eyes wide, their smirks evaporating. There was something in his stare, fierce, protective, and unyielding, that pierced through their bravado. For the first time, they looked uncertain, like children caught playing with fire. He stepped closer, towering over them now, his presence enough to make them stumble back. No shouting, no insults, just a steady warning in his voice. He bent down, lifting his daughter gently, brushing dirt from her clothes. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping his anger contained. He whispered softly to her, "You're safe now. I'm here." She clung to him, burying her face into his chest, her tears soaking his shirt. The bullies muttered excuses, claiming it was just a joke, but the father's glare silenced them again. "You think this is funny?" he asked, his voice sharp but calm. "You don't put your hands on her. Not today, not ever." The crowd that had gathered shifted uncomfortably, realizing the truth of what had been happening right in front of them all along. Teachers rushed over too late, trying to restore order, but it was clear, the balance of power had shifted. For the first time, the girl wasn't alone. Her father had seen everything, and he had drawn a line no one dared to cross. The bullies backed away, heads lowered, their laughter replaced by shame. And as her father led her home, one arm wrapped firmly around her shoulders, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: safe, protected, and unbreakably loved. The following days felt different, though she still walked with caution. The memory of being shoved, laughed at, and humiliated lingered in her heart, but so did the memory of her father's voice echoing across the playground. The bullies were nowhere near as bold anymore. When she passed them in the hallways, they avoided her eyes, muttering to themselves but never daring to come close. Their arrogance had cracked the moment her father had stood tall, protecting her with words that felt like a shield. The whispers around school spread quickly, everyone knew now. Teachers who had once turned a blind eye suddenly paid attention, calling out harsh tones of discipline they had long ignored. Even classmates who had remained silent started offering small gestures of kindness: a smile when she entered class, a seat saved beside them, or a quiet, "Do you want to join us?" at lunch. But the greatest change was in her own spirit. She no longer hunched her shoulders as though she wanted to disappear. Her steps were still careful, but lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted. At night, when her father asked about her day, she didn't just say, "Fine," anymore. She told him about the subjects she liked, about the books she had read, and even about the jokes she heard in class. He listened with a soft smile, still heavy with guilt that he hadn't seen her suffering sooner, but grateful that she was opening up. More than once, he found himself staring at her across the dinner table, realizing how close he had come to missing her silent cries for help. And every time, he vowed never again. The bullies eventually tried to test boundaries with her once more, but they no longer had the power they once did. When they whispered cruel names in passing, she didn't shrink, she stood taller, her father's voice echoing in her heart like armor: "Touch her again and you're done." They saw the change too, that she wasn't the same quiet target anymore. Their words lost their bite, bouncing off a girl who had found her strength. Slowly, their mockery faded, swallowed by their own shame. Her father knew he couldn't always be there, but that wasn't the point. That one moment of stepping in had given her something more valuable than constant protection. It had given her permission to believe she was worth standing up for. And with that belief, she began to stand up for herself. One afternoon, when a smaller boy was cornered by the same bullies, she surprised herself by stepping forward. Her voice shook, but she said firmly, "Leave him alone." They stared at her, stunned. She wasn't afraid anymore. They walked away, and the boy looked at her with grateful eyes. That night, she told her father what she had done. His pride was so strong it nearly brought him to tears. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still challenges, and there would always be struggles, but the difference now was clear: she was no longer walking through them alone. Each morning when her father dropped her off at school, she carried his love like invisible armor. The same girl who once prayed quietly for someone to save her now knew that she had been given the greatest gift, a protector who not only stood against the world for her but also taught her how to stand tall herself. And in that truth, her story was rewritten. No longer the girl who hid in the shadows, she became the girl who rose from them. No longer the father too tired to notice, he became the hero who showed her what strength truly looked like. Together, they built a new chapter, one where silence was broken, courage grew, and love won over cruelty.